The asphalt of Route 58 trembled before the deafening roar even reached the city limits. 312 Hell's Angels, a blinding tidal wave of chrome, denim, and leather, descended upon a forgotten, broken-down alleyway. They weren't there to start a war. They were there for a 14-year-old homeless boy who thought his life was over. The San Joaquin Valley heat was unforgiving, baking the dirt on the outskirts of Bakersfield into a cracked, white mosaic. 14-year-old Leo Miller sat in the suffocating shade of an abandoned Texaco gas station, his knees pulled to his chest. His clothes were stiff with days of accumulated sweat and grease, and his stomach twisted with a hollow, gnawing ache that had become his most constant companion. It had been 8 months since his father, a brilliant but luckless diesel mechanic, died of a sudden heart attack. With no mother in the picture, and the threat of the state foster system looming, Leo had bolted. He took the only thing of value his father had left him, a battered canvas tool roll and a head full of mechanical knowledge. The abandoned station had been his sanctuary for the last 3 weeks, a place where he could hide from the local meth dealers who preyed on the county's forgotten runaways. The silence of the dead afternoon was suddenly shattered by the aggressive, staggering rhythm of a heavy V-twin engine. Leo peeked through the shattered glass of the garage bay doors. Rolling down the desolate frontage road was a massive, custom-built Harley-Davidson Panhead. The bike was a work of brutal art, stripped down and painted a deep, metallic cherry red. But it sounded awful. The engine was coughing violently, spitting black smoke from the exhaust, struggling to keep a steady idle. The rider muscled the dying machine into the gravel lot of the Texaco station. The engine gave one final, violent shudder and died, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The man who stepped off the bike was a mountain of a human being. He wore faded Levi's, heavy engineer boots, and a sun-faded leather vest. On the back of the vest was the unmistakable red and white Death Head logo, arched over by a top rocker that read Hell's Angels and a bottom rocker that read California. This was John Callahan. He was a man whose reputation preceded him in the valley, a seasoned veteran of the club with silver streaking through his heavy beard and arms covered in faded prison ink. He kicked the kickstand down with a heavy, steel-toed boot, pulled off his sunglasses, and let out a string of vicious curses that made Leo flinch in the shadows. Callahan grabbed a wrench from his saddlebag and struck the side of the engine block in pure frustration. "Come on, you worthless piece of iron," he growled, the gravel in his voice matching the driveway beneath his boots. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, looking up and down the empty, heat-distorted highway. He was miles from the nearest town, his cell phone had no signal, and the temperature was hovering around 104 degrees. Inside the garage, Leo hesitated. He knew the rules of the street. Stay invisible. You don't approach strangers, and you certainly don't approach a furious, stranded outlaw biker. But as Leo listened to the man fruitlessly kicking the starter, the mechanical rhythm in his brain took over. He recognized the sound the engine had made before it died. It wasn't a seized piston. It was an airway restriction, coupled with a drowned spark. Before his survival instincts could stop him, Leo pushed open the rusted side door. The hinges screamed in the quiet afternoon. Callahan whipped around, his hand instinctively dropping toward the heavy hunting knife sheathed at his hip. His eyes, cold and assessing, locked onto the scrawny, dirt-smudged teenager, standing nervously by the cracked wall. "What do you want, kid?" Callahan barked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "We ain't exactly open for business. Keep walking." Leo swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I ain't walking anywhere, mister. I live here." He pointed a shaking finger at the smoking panhead. "And you're flooding the carburetor. Kicking it like that is only making it worse." Callahan froze, his heavy boots grinding against the dirt as he shifted his weight. He looked at the boy, really looked at him. taking in the oversized, filthy t-shirt, the bruised cheekbone, and the desperate hunger in his sunken eyes. Then he looked back at his bike. "Oh, yeah?" Callahan sneered, stepping away from the motorcycle and crossing his massive arms. "And what does a little alley rat know about a 52 panhead?" "I know it sounds like your float valve is stuck open," Leo said, stepping slightly into the light. His voice was quiet, but steady, rooted in the one thing he was confident about. "When you pulled in, she was running rich, spitting black. The needle valve isn't seating, so fuel is just dumping into the manifold. You're drowning your spark plugs." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the faint ticking of the cooling exhaust pipes. Callahan's eyes narrowed. The kid was right. It was exactly the problem he had suspected. But his tools were inadequate, and his patience was gone. "Even if you're right, kid," Callahan grunted, rolling his shoulders. "I don't have a replacement needle, and I sure as hell don't have the compressed air to blow out the jets. So unless you got a master mechanic's shop hiding behind those boarded-up windows, I'm stuck here until a brother rides past." "I don't have a shop," Leo said, his eyes darting to his canvas tool roll just inside the door, "but I have my dad's tools, and I know how to bypass it to get you home." Callahan stared at the kid for a long, agonizing moment. The biker had lived a life of violence, brotherhood, and harsh realities. He wasn't accustomed to charity, especially not from a street kid. But the sun was beating down unmercifully, and he had a club meeting in Fresno he couldn't miss. He took a step back, gesturing to the heavy iron beast with a sweeping motion of his calloused hand. "All right, wrench, show me what you got. But if you strip a single bolt on this shovel, I'm throwing you in the dumpster." Leo didn't waste time. He darted back into the shadows of the garage and retrieved his father's tool roll. He laid it out on the gravel beside the bike with a practiced, reverent care. Callahan watched silently, noticing how the boy's grimy, trembling hands suddenly became steady the moment they touched the cold steel of a wrench. "I'm Leo," the boy mumbled, keeping his eyes on the engine as he selected a screwdriver and a small wrench. "John?" the biker replied simply, leaning his massive frame against the rusted shell of a gas pump. For the next 45 minutes, the unlikely pair worked in the suffocating heat. Leo carefully removed the air cleaner housing, exposing the S&S carburetor. His small hands navigated the tight spaces with an agility Callahan's thick fingers lacked. He dropped the fuel bowl, catching the spilling gasoline in a rusted tin can he kicked over from the debris. "Needle is shot," Leo announced, pulling out the tiny brass component. "The rubber tip is eaten away. Probably bad gas." "Got a spare in your back pocket, Leo?" John asked, his tone dripping with dry sarcasm. "No," Leo replied, wiping sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of black grease across his forehead. "But I can seat it temporarily." Leo jogged over to the edge of the lot, where a decaying Ford pickup sat rotting in the weeds. He popped the hood, rummaged around for a moment, and returned with a small piece of clear rubber tubing he'd cut from the windshield washer line. Using a razor blade from his toolkit, he meticulously sliced a microscopic ring of the rubber, fitting it over the worn tip of the needle valve to act as a makeshift gasket. John Callahan watched the boy's resourcefulness with genuine shock. He had seen seasoned mechanics struggle with less. He also noticed, in the harsh afternoon light, the dark, purple bruising blooming along Leo's jawline, and the defensive way the kid flinched whenever John moved too quickly. "Who gave you the shiner, kid?" John asked, his voice losing some of its gravelly edge, replaced by a low, dangerous curiosity. Leo's hand stopped moving for a fraction of a second. "Nobody. Tripped over a tire iron in the dark." "Bullshit," John said flatly. "I've been in enough fights to know what a knuckle sandwich looks like. Somebody hit you." Leo carefully fitted the bowl back onto the carburetor and began tightening the screws. "It's just some guys. A guy named Silas. He runs the block a few miles down. Says if I sleep in this garage, I gotta pay rent. I didn't have any money yesterday." John's jaw tightened. He knew men like Silas, bottom-feeding scavengers who preyed on the weak, peddling poison and exploiting runaways. John's own son would have been around Leo's age, had a drunk driver not taken him from the world 5 years ago. It was a wound that had hardened John's heart, turning him into the ruthless enforcer the club needed. But looking at this grease-stained boy holding a wrench, a tiny crack formed in that hardened shell. "Give it a try," Leo said, stepping back and wiping his hands on his ruined shirt. John swung his heavy leg over the saddle. He turned the ignition, primed the throttle twice, and kicked the heavy pedal down with all his weight. The panhead coughed once, hesitated, and then roared to life. The idle was smooth, a steady, deafening potato-potato-potato rhythm that shook the dust from the awning above. John revved the throttle. No black smoke, no hesitation. The makeshift seal was holding perfectly. John killed the engine to a low rumble and looked down at the boy. For the first time, a genuine smile broke through the biker's heavy beard. "I'll be damned," John muttered. He reached into his leather vest. Leo instinctively took a half-step back, anticipating a blow or a threat. Instead, John pulled out a heavy, solid silver Zippo lighter. It was deeply engraved with the Hell's Angel's winged skull. John tossed the lighter through the air. Leo caught it clumsily against his chest. "You did me a solid today, Leo," John said, his voice loud over the rumbling engine. "That lighter belongs to me. You hold on to it. It's got my road name etched on the back. Big John. Anybody gives you trouble, you show 'em that. You tell 'em you're under my protection. You hear me?" Leo stared at the heavy silver object in his palm, overwhelmed. "I don't want money, sir. I just like working on engines." "It ain't money, kid. It's respect. And respect is the only currency that matters out here." John dropped the bike into first gear with a heavy clunk. "I'll be coming back through this way next week. I expect you to be here. I might need a mechanic." With a twist of the throttle, John Callahan tore out of the gravel lot, the rear tire kicking up a cloud of white dust as he merged onto Route 58, disappearing into the heat haze. Leo stood alone in the silence of the abandoned lot, clutching the silver lighter tight in his fist. For the first time in 8 months, he felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't entirely invisible. But hope, on the streets, is a dangerous thing. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. Leo gathered his tools, his stomach growling loudly, and retreated into the dark belly of the garage to sleep. He didn't hear the crunch of tires on the gravel until it was too late. 3 beaten-up sedans pulled into the Texaco lot, their headlights cutting through the darkness and illuminating the broken bay doors of the garage. Car doors slammed. Heavy footsteps crunched on the broken glass. "Come on out, little rat," a voice echoed through the empty lot. It was Silas, and he hadn't come alone. Leo scrambled backward into the deepest corner of the garage, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He fumbled in his pocket, his fingers gripping the cold, heavy silver of the Zippo lighter. But as the shadows of 5 grown men filled the doorway, carrying baseball bats and heavy chains, Leo knew a piece of metal wasn't going to save him. John Callahan was miles away, and Silas was here to collect his rent. The heavy beams of 3 halogen flashlights cut through the dusty darkness of the garage, blinding Leo. He threw his arms over his face, his bruised ribs aching with the sudden movement. "Look at this," Silas sneered, stepping into the circle of light. Silas was a wiry, dangerous man in his late 30s, his skin pockmarked and his eyes jittery with the nervous energy of a heavy amphetamine habit. He was a bottom feeder who ran a crew of scavengers, terrorizing the homeless population on the outskirts of Bakersfield. Behind him stood 4 other men, carrying lengths of rusted rebar and heavy wooden axe handles. "Rent's due, kid," Silas said, kicking an empty oil can out of his way. The metallic clatter echoed sharply against the concrete walls. "You've been squatting in my territory for 3 weeks. I told you yesterday, you either pay up or you run product for us. You ain't done neither." Leo pressed his back against the cold, damp, cinder block wall. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm in his throat. "I don't have any money, Silas. I swear, and I ain't selling your garbage." "Then we've got a problem." Silas sighed with exaggerated disappointment. He nodded to a heavy-set man to his left. "Drag him out into the light. Let's see what he's hiding in those pockets." 2 men surged forward, grabbing Leo by his thin arms and dragging him roughly across the oil-stained concrete. The boy kicked and struggled, but he was no match for full-grown men. They threw him down onto the gravel just outside the bay doors, the sharp rocks biting into his palms and knees. As Leo scrambled to get up, a heavy boot planted itself firmly on the center of his back, pinning him to the ground. "Search him," Silas ordered. Rough hands dug into Leo's filthy denim pockets. In a panic, Leo remembered the weight in his right pocket. He tried to twist away, but a hand plunged in and pulled out the heavy, solid silver Zippo lighter John Callahan had given him hours earlier. The man holding it flipped it open. The metallic clink sounded incredibly loud in the quiet night. He shined his flashlight on the engraved surface, his eyes widening slightly. "Hey, Silas," the man muttered, his voice losing some of its bravado. "Look at this. This ain't cheap. It's heavy. And look at the engraving." Silas snatched the lighter from his hand, squinting at the winged Death Head logo. He turned it over, reading the name Big John etched into the polished silver. For a brief second, a flicker of genuine apprehension crossed Silas's twitchy features. Everyone in the Central Valley knew who the Hells Angels were. Some of the older guys in Silas's crew had even done time with members of the club, sharing stories of men who rode with legends like Sonny Barger, men who operated by a brutal, unyielding code of loyalty and vengeance. Leo lifted his head from the dirt, spitting out a mouthful of dust. He gave that to me," Leo gasped, his voice trembling. "He said I'm under his protection. Big John. He's a Hell's Angel. You touch me and he'll kill you." Silence hung in the air for a long, agonizing moment. The heavy-set man took a step back, looking nervously at Silas. "Man, if that really belongs to a patch holder, we shouldn't mess with it. Or the kid. They don't joke around with their property." Silas stared at the lighter, his jaw clenching. His pride was warring with his survival instincts. But Silas was a man ruled by his ego and his addictions, and he couldn't stand being intimidated by a scrawny 14-year-old boy in front of his own crew. Silas let out a harsh, barking laugh that shattered the tension. "Protection? Are you out of your mind, kid?" He crouched down, grabbing a handful of Leo's hair and pulling his head back. "You think a 1%er gives a damn about a stray dog living in a gas station? You stole this. You probably lifted it off a drunk biker at a rest stop." "I fixed his motorcycle," Leo cried out, tears of frustration stinging his eyes. "I fixed his panhead. He gave it to me." "Liar," Silas spat. He stood up, slipping the silver Zippo into his own jacket pocket. "This is mine now. Consider it a down payment on your rent. But you still owe me the principal." Silas kicked Leo hard in the ribs. The boy gasped, curling into a tight ball as the air was driven from his lungs. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the devastation of what happened next. One of the men, sweeping his flashlight around the interior of the garage, spotted the canvas tool roll Leo had left neatly folded on a rusted workbench. "Hey, boss, looks like the rat has some toys," the man called out. He grabbed the canvas roll and carried it out to the lot, dumping it upside down. Dozens of gleaming, meticulously maintained tools crashed onto the gravel. Snap-on wrenches, a heavy steel micrometer, specialized pliers, and a beautiful, vintage torque wrench that had belonged to Leo's grandfather. It was the only tangible connection Leo had left to his father, the only thing in the world that made him feel like he had a purpose. "No, please!" Leo screamed, trying to crawl toward the pile. "Please don't! That's my dad's!" Silas walked over to the pile of tools. A cruel smile twisted his lips. "You like fixing things, kid? Let's see you fix this." Silas picked up the heavy torque wrench by its handle and smashed it violently against the concrete base of the gas pump. The precision gauge shattered into pieces. He then turned to his men. "Trash it all." For the next 10 minutes, Leo watched in helpless agony as the men systematically destroyed his livelihood. They stomped on the micrometer until the dial cracked. They bent the handles of the screwdrivers against the pavement. They threw the smaller sockets deep into the tall, overgrown weeds of the highway median, where they would never be found. When they were finished, the tools were nothing but useless scrap metal. "We'll be back on Friday," Silas said, lighting a cigarette with John Callahan's silver Zippo. He blew the smoke down at Leo. "Have $50 waiting for me, or next time, we break your hands." The men climbed back into their sedans, laughing and revving their engines as they peeled out of the lot, leaving Leo alone in the suffocating darkness. The boy dragged himself over to the ruined pile of tools. He picked up the shattered torque wrench, his dirty fingers trembling as he traced the broken glass of the dial. He didn't cry out. He just lay down in the gravel, pulling his knees to his chest, and let the crushing weight of absolute despair swallow him whole. John Callahan had given him hope, and the street had taken it away. The morning sun baked the dew off the asphalt of Route 58. Leo hadn't moved from the gravel. He was stiff, his bruised ribs throbbing, feeling hollowed out and completely numb. Around 9 a.m., the solitary, heavy thumping of a V-twin engine pierced the silence. John Callahan pulled his cherry-red panhead into the Texaco lot. He had ridden back to retrieve his heavy leather riding gloves, left sitting on a rusted gas pump. He expected to find the kid sleeping. Instead, he found a massacre of steel and a broken boy bleeding in the dirt. John's heavy boots crunched rapidly across the lot. He knelt beside Leo, his massive shadow blocking the harsh sun. His eyes drifted from Leo's swollen face to the scattered, destroyed tools. He recognized the shattered torque wrench. "Who did this?" John asked, his tone deathly quiet. Leo swallowed hard. "Silas." He came back with his guys. "Did you show them the lighter?" "I did," Leo whispered, looking away in shame. "They didn't care. Silas said I stole it. He took your lighter, and then they broke my dad's tools." A terrifying silence fell over the lot. Stealing a patch holder's property, especially an item bearing the club's insignia, was an unforgivable offense. But worse, Silas had brutalized a child under John's sworn protection. John stood up slowly, handing Leo a canteen of water. "Get in the shade. I need to make a phone call." John pulled a flip phone from his pocket. Leo couldn't hear the entire conversation, but he heard the tone, short, clipped, and heavy with authority. He caught the words, "disrespect," "my property," and Bakersfield Charter. Hanging up, John walked back. "Where does this Silas operate?" "An old auto salvage yard 4 miles down the frontage road," Leo replied. "We're waiting, Leo," John said calmly, pulling a rag to wipe the dust off his chrome pipes. "You don't swat a fly with your bare hands when you can bring down the whole damn sky on it." 2 hours later, Leo felt a vibration trembling up through his shoes. The rusted tin roof rattled. Then the sound hit. A low, rumbling thunder rolling across the valley. Coming down the highway was a blinding, roaring wave of chrome, denim, and leather. 312 Hells Angels from the Bakersfield, Fresno, and Oakland charters had mobilized at John's call. The sheer volume of the engines was a localized hurricane of mechanical fury. They slowed to a heavy crawl, parting to allow John to merge. John fired up the engine Leo had fixed. "Climb on the back, kid. We're going to get your tools back." Leo scrambled onto the pillion seat. John dropped the bike into gear, leading the massive pack down the frontage road. 4 miles away, Silas and his crew were drinking cheap beer outside a rusted trailer in their salvage yard. Silas was idly flipping the silver Zippo open and shut. Then the ground began to shake. The iron gates of the salvage yard were pushed open by the sheer weight of the front line. The Hells Angels poured into the dirt lot like a flood, completely surrounding the trailer and the 5 terrified men in a massive, inescapable circle of rumbling V-twins. The engines cut off in a staggered wave. The sudden silence was suffocating. John stepped off his bike, Leo sliding off behind him. 312 men stared silently at Silas. Nobody drew a weapon. The psychological weight of the Brotherhood was enough to crush the air out of the yard. John walked slowly toward Silas, whose knees were knocking together. "I believe you have something that belongs to me," John said, his voice echoing. "And you broke something that belonged to my mechanic." Silas handed over the silver Zippo with a shaking hand. John slipped it into his vest. "The tools you destroyed belonged to this boy's dead father. They were worth $2,000. I think an idiot tax brings that up to $5,000. "I don't have $5,000 in cash," Silas stammered. A massive biker with a scarred face stepped forward. "Then sell the cars. You got 10 minutes to empty every wallet and mattress in that trailer. Whatever you come up short, we take out of your hide. Then you're leaving California." Silas and his crew tore their trailer apart in a panicked frenzy. Within 8 minutes, a crumpled pile of bills was placed at John's feet. John picked up the wad of cash and handed it to Leo. "Buy better tools." He turned back to Silas. "If I ever hear your name in the valley again, I won't just make a phone call. I'll come myself. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," Silas sobbed. "We're gone. Today." John nodded to the charter president, who gave a sharp whistle. Over 300 engines roared to life in unison. As they rode back down Route 58, John leaned back. "My buddy runs a custom shop in Oakland. He needs an apprentice who knows his way around a carburetor. Comes with a cot and 3 hot meals a day." Leo gripped John's vest tighter, the cash secured in his pocket. Hiding tears of overwhelming relief against the rough leather, he realized that surrounded by the roar of the Brotherhood, he was no longer invisible. Leo Miller never slept in an alleyway again. He used Silas's money to buy a set of professional-grade tools, taking the Oakland apprenticeship. Under the protective eye of the Hells Angels, the homeless teenager grew into a highly respected master mechanic. Family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it is forged in the heat of a broken engine, bound by a silver lighter and defended by the thunderous roar of Brotherhood.